Hello BookTube, Books with Banks back again today with another video. This is my third more official video in my Kharkanas video series, and this is my first really in-depth analysis into one of the themes Erikson is exploring with this trilogy. I will be exploring the theme of justice and how characters in his world justify their actions and causes for war and or violence. I have put a ton of time into this, and I really hope you enjoy it. There will be spoilers for several key moments throughout Kharkanas Book 1, Forge of Darkness. However, I will not be spoiling everything in that book, nor will I spoil anything whatsoever for Book 2, Fall of Light. So I expect my audience here to consist primarily of people interested in this series who have either started, finished Forge of Darkness, read both books, or those interested who haven't yet begun but aren't too bothered or worried about spoilers. In fact, I think it can often be a little difficult to pinpoint how Erikson's themes tie a book together, so hopefully this video will be able to help people connect certain threads that they might have struggled with. If you enjoy this type of thing, please like, subscribe, comment below, and share with any friends or on any platforms where you think people might be interested. Hopefully I will get to the point someday where I can have these long-form analytical type of discussions with other YouTube content creators. As always, thank you for watching, and now please sit back and enjoy. Who is just and who is just self-righteous? Characters moralizing and justification of violence in Steven Erikson's Forge of Darkness. Alright. Neither anger nor patronizing amusement touched Sander's worn face. Very well. The issue I am struggling with is one of moral stance. Written law is in itself pure, at least insofar as language can make it. Ambiguity emerges only in its practical application upon society, and at this point, hypocrisy seems to be the inevitable consequence. The law bends to those in power like a willow, or perhaps a cultured rosebush, or even a fruit-bearing tree trained against a wall where it grows depends upon the whims of those in power, and before too long, why, the law becomes a twisted thing indeed. Kataspala set the goblet down, eyed the food on the plate before him, smoked meat, some kind of glazed vegetable, positioned in a way as if to regard each other. But are not laws little more than formalized opinions, Lord? Sander's brows lifted. I begin to see the direction of your thoughts, Kataspala. To answer you, yes, they are opinions on the proper and peaceful governance of society. Excuse me, but peaceful is not a word that comes to my mind when thinking of law. At its core is subjugation, after all. Sander considered and then said, only in the matter of mitigating damaging or antisocial behavior, and at this point I return you to my first comment, that is, of moral stance. It is the very matter with which I am struggling, with little forward progress, I admit. So, he took another sip and then set the goblet down and picked up his knife. Let us set aside the notion of peaceful for the moment. Consider the very foundation of the matter, namely, that law exists to impose rules of acceptable behavior in social discourse. Yes? Good. Then let us add the notion of protecting one from harm, both physical and spiritual, and, well, you see the dilemma. This conversation is held between a war hero, Legion Commander Vathar Sander, and a famous artist charged with the task of painting a portrait of Sander, depicting him in all his victorious glory. The two men hint at how easily corruptible any form of government is by the mere existence of power dynamics in all forms of civilization. At the mention of peace, Sander is quick to point out that the maintenance of peace is at the core of his moral dilemma. Steven Erikson, author of Forge of Darkness, goes on to explore the very idea of what a just society is, what a just cause might be for war, when violence is justified to protect a civilization, how the soldiers and citizens of society justify their more questionable actions, and a slew of other questions throughout Forge of Darkness, the first novel in the Kharkanas trilogy. All of these questions swirl around the theme of justice and injustice and the larger question of how will this theme play into the pre-civil/holy war world of Teist society over the course of the next 3 books. Kadaspala, the painter from the passage above, ponders the justifications of war and the righteous call to arms much later on in the book. He thinks to himself, quote, "Today's righteous cause is religion. The gods are paying attention, after all, wanting you to die in their name. Why? To prove your loyalty, of course. And what of their loyalty, you might wonder? Has your God blessed you and your life, answered your every prayer, given proof of its omnipotence?" And with that last word, omnipotence, readers' minds are cast back to the painter's conversation from the beginning of the novel, the conversation about law and order, and about those who wield most power in civilizations. So, when wars are civil and or holy, are the gods at play the most powerful players? And those who worship them simply dragged this way and that, motivated by whatever cause their deities have promised them is most justified? It is these and many other questions and points of connection that this analytical essay will explore. Part 1. The Principal Players. In Forge of Darkness, Erikson has chosen to explore most of his themes through the lens of introspective and self-critical characters. So for a reader to better understand what these themes are, those characters must first be introduced. As mentioned in the introduction, Legion Commander Lord Vather Urusander is the war hero and beacon of hope for the working and soldier classes of Kharkanas society, promising those lower classes an eventual place in the sunlight. His promise is exemplified by his own elevation of some of his soldiers and lower officers to their own respective places in that sunlight. Quote, "Though born of a lesser house, Urusander had risen quickly through the ranks in the harrowing first months of the Foralkan War. Urusander had saved the Teist people. Without him, Hunral well knew, Kuralt Galain would have fallen. The career that followed through the entire campaign to drive back the Foralkan, and then the punitive pursuit of the Jelarkan deep into the lands of the Northwest, had elevated Urusander to legendary status. This portrait would be copied upon the wall of the Inner Avenue and the Citadel in Kharkanas, and placed alongside images of high-born Teist." End quote. Urusander challenges this royalist, familial, nepotistic system of nobility with his own lofty ideals and his dream of a meritocracy. At the same time, this passage from Hunral's point of view, a character we'll discuss further below, his point of view also hints at some of the hypocrisy in Law and Order in which Urusander and Kadaspala had mentioned in that conversation I opened the essay up with. Ral, despite his glowing praise for Urusander, does mention a, quote, "punitive pursuit of an already defeated enemy." This is surely conduct and a sort of questionable form of warfare that hardly befits an underdog, heroic leader of the people, the type of heroic leader Kadaspala, among others, has chosen to paint Urusander as. Next, shifting focus away from Urusander directly, though he will be a significant player further on in the analysis. For now, Sharinus Ankadu should briefly step into the light. Sharinus has a larger part to play in the events of Book 2, Fall of Light, though she does offer a unique vantage point on our more central characters here in Forge of Darkness. Sharinus is an officer in Urusander's Legion, and arguably she is the most self-aware and morally complex of Urusander's officers, whereas others buy into the lionization of their commander and the justifications for the Legion's actions. Sharinus is about as skeptical of these justifications as Urusander is himself. She offers an opinion of one of the other principal players involved in the novel early on, and curiously, her opinion of this man differs drastically from most others. This individual is none other than Hunral, the man speculating above on Urusander's sudden rise to noble status. Sharinus is considering what might it mean for one master of a greater house, a man named Ilgist Rand, should things at a diplomatic meeting go poorly, when she explains to us, the reader, quote, "But they won't, as in things going wrong. Hunral is honorable. He knows what he is doing, and he knows, as do we all, that what he is doing is the right thing to do." End quote. Attention must be paid to this take, and considered especially further on in this essay in contrast to other characters' opinions of Ral. Also, the right thing to do is a statement really at the crux of this theme woven beautifully throughout Erikson's characters' arcs. Now, Hun Rao is the heir of a greater house in his own right, and he is also a close ally of Orosander. Upon my first reading of the novel, I felt that Rao was to Orosander as Shakespeare's Iago is to Othello. I've since revised that analogy, leaving alone the Orosander-Othello comparison, but removing Rao from that Iago position, allowing another character to assume that ignoble role. This other character, will be covered in greater detail further down. Instead, now I would simply describe Ral as a Machiavellian drunk engineering the chaotic conflicts at the heart of the trilogy for his own personal benefit. Whilst pondering the threat posed by potential invaders coming from the Vitter, a sea of light and magical power, Ral explains an element of his more cautious political motivations. Ral thinks to himself, quote, "They did not need another war, and yet in that possibility he could see certain advantages, though he could not but view them with unease. The resurrection of Orosander's legion, an invasion would give cause to take up arms once more, and so set the stage for undeniable clout." End quote. Ral begins this trend of characters almost desperately searching for a just cause, or something worth fighting for. Most of these principal players are happy to engage in violence and war again, so long as the cause is just or worthy. So then Erikson's question becomes, to what lengths will these characters self-delude and moralize until they can say they have adequately justified their violent plans? On that note, what were the just causes of war in days past? Let us turn now to the aforementioned Forelcan people, those with whom the Teist of Kharkanas and Corald Galain were previously at war. In this world Erikson has crafted here, there are these characters known as Azathanai. This group is essentially a cast of bickering demigods and godlike beings walking among and interfering with the lives of the Teist. The race of the Forelcan people, with whom the Teist were at war, the Forelcan are said to have worshipped one of these Azathanai, a woman named Kilmandaros. Later in the novel, an Azathanai named Draconis, more on him in successive essays, asks Kilmandaros, "You would make weapons of your followers?" The question, in and of itself, harkens back to Kataspala's musings of the righteous religious cause, but then Kilmandaros' answer helps to paint a clearer picture of what this Forelcan people were/are actually like. She responds, "What other good are they, suzerain? Besides, the Forelcan do not worship me. They have made illimitable law their god, even as they suffer its ceaseless corruption at their own hands. At some point, they will deem manifest their right to all that the dog runners own, and make of this law a zealotry to justify genocide." End quote. For additional context, the dog runners and deniers are people who live on and within the periphery of noble Teist society, with the main characters often referring to them as savage and uncivilized. At this point in the novel, Erikson was clearly drawing a parallel between what Kilmandaros fears the Forelcan will do to the dog runners and what Orosander's legion has, by this point, already started to do to dog runners and deniers. As this essay is not so much about plot, no more needs to be covered here other than, yes, in fact, the Legion, its officers, and followers have, by this point in the book, begun to justify their own violence perpetrated against people they deem less than. Further still, many of the more malicious Legion members have enacted a campaign to malign the collective cultural character of these dog runners and deniers to try and motivate others to war with these people. So while Orosander's legion may have defeated a moralizing force of cruelty and illimitable law, they have now tragically inherited many of the qualities of their once sworn enemy, the Forelcan. Next, let us turn to a character involved in that violence against said dog runner people. Narad's character arc across both novels so far might be complex enough to warrant an entirely separate analytical essay, but for now he will serve well as a mirror to Vather Orosander. Throughout the novel, Nereid participates not only in the loosely Legion-sanctioned murders of innocent civilian dog runners, but also in the slaughter of a noble household and the rape of the soon-to-be-wed Inesdia. The group of soldiers Nereid is fighting alongside go on to be complicit in the framing of said slaughter and rape on the very same dog runner and deniers communities and people Nereid and his officers helped to slaughter earlier. Let it be known, then, that Nereid has committed horrible, unredeemable, unjustifiable acts. Yet Erikson has chosen to place us inside of Nereid's mind for several sequences throughout the novel, and from that vantage point, we are able to see how painfully, brutally remorseful, and self-loathing this Nereid character really is. Nereid is so honest with himself, so much more so than most of the main characters I've already introduced, and a few I will introduce momentarily, hinting at how symbolism is tied into this theme further down, after his face, Nereid's face, is brutally beaten up and scarred. Nereid considers, quote, he was an ugly man now, and he would think like an ugly man, but one still strong enough to keep sorrow's head down beneath the surface and find satisfaction each and every time he drowned it. He wasn't interested in a soft world anymore, a world where tenderness and warmth were possible, rising like bright flowers from beds of skeletal lichen and sunburnt moss. Further on, after the rape of Inesdia, Nereid thinks to himself, quote, I am not like the others here. I am filled with regret when they are not. For them no redemption should be offered. Take their lives in return for what they did, but I yearn to make it all right again. I dream of doing something to unravel what happened and what I did. I whispered to her, I begged her, and she answered with her last breath. Was there a word in it? I don't know. I will never know. There was a man who loved her, who sought to marry her, but I was the last man in her arms, ugly Nereid, shuddering like an animal. I know you hunt me, sir, whoever you are. I know that you dream of finding me and taking my life, but you'll not find me. I'll do that much for you, sir, because I tell you, taking my life will offer you no release, no peace. Instead, and this I vow, I will find something right to fight for and set my life into the path of every murderer, every rapist, until I am finally cut down. End quote. It is in this way that Nereid's complete acceptance of how unjustified all of his actions are, that he stands as the perfect counterpoint to all of these other characters deluding themselves and continuing to justify the unjustifiable. Simultaneously, however, Nereid is hopeful that he will find some sort of redemption, or at least a cause worth fighting for eventually. In other words, Nereid's viewpoint is a complicated reiteration and refutation of Urusander's own. Finally, in this introduction to the principal players, I will end by covering two characters in conversation with one another. The first being a character I had anticipated I would spend more time analyzing than I actually wound up doing, and the second being a character for whom I was surprised to have found such a wealth of rich material around, and inner monologue from her to pick apart. First, Animander Rake. Possibly the face of this prequel trilogy, at least for those familiar with the broader Malazan canon and the role of the Teist people in those other series. Well after our introduction to him and his two brothers, Erikson eventually offers some insight into Rake's state of mind and moral compass. Two of the Azathani, Grizzen Farrell and Kaladin Brood, are discussing the nature of Rake's character when Brood succinctly claims, quote, there is a surety about him, that much was clear, beyond the gift of the title given him and his closeness to Mother Dark. He possesses something deliberate and yet of great depth. He is, I think, a violent man, yet is not at ease with the violence in him. This claim of Brood's paints Rake as a man fiercely loyal to his sovereign, Mother Dark, yet also a man with a well-restrained, albeit ever-present, violent streak. We will sit with this brief introduction as we turn to our final character to cover in depth. The High Priestess Centaura is a jealous, ambitious, paranoid, and beautifully drawn portrait of the merging of political and religious zeal. Centaura is, in fact, who I would now say is the Iago to Urusander's Othello. Centaura is introduced in conversation with and from the point of view of the older High Priestess of Mother Dark, Emerald Lanier. Both women share the title, though that is about the extent of all they share. Quote, High Priestess Centaura's arrival in the chamber had, Emerald realized, announced itself a few moments earlier in the sudden hush among the priestesses. Such was the force of the young woman's power, a thing of polished gold and dripping blood. End quote. Emerald's impression of Centaura and the first impression Erikson has given us, the reader, of her, all serve to depict a youthful, powerful woman with an air of purity and violence about her. It is appropriate now to introduce Rake and then Centaura, as Rake provides us with one of Erikson's most colorful depictions of the High Priestess. In frustration, Rake explains to Centaura that, quote, your elevation was intended to ease the burden of administration from Sister Emerald. Little did Mother Dark realize your venal ambition, and if you think high tits and a damp nest are the surest paths to power, might I refer you to Gallant's poem, Trophies of Youth. By the poem's end, even the words fade, end quote. This scathing criticism serves less to make us dislike Centaura, and more to elucidate her motivations, and the reputations she is struggling to overcome throughout the rest of the book. While neither Rake nor Centaura speak much of justice and virtuous wars here in their introductions, both characters' moral mindsets are introduced cleverly and quickly enough so that their future pronouncements on the theme will flow naturally. Take a breath. Part 2, Symbolism and Triss coming to Kharkanas. I have touched briefly upon one climactic scene, in which Legion soldiers, through miscommunication and at least a small bit of bloodlust on their part, decided to slaughter nobles and house guards the night before Inesdia's wedding. But now, to continue the thematic analysis, I will go actually to an earlier climax in the novel, and that is the moment in which the Azathanite Triss comes to Kharkanas and bestows her gifts upon Mother Dark and the High Priestess Centaura. To first understand the narrative importance of such gifts, however, Kataspala offers a poetic description of symbols and propaganda in Kharkanas society. Quote, I have painted a man worthy of being Mother Dark's husband. They will see his strength, his resolute integrity, because these lie on the surface. They will not see the underside of such things, the cruelty beneath strength, the cold pride behind that stern resolution, the blade of judgment grasped firm in integrity's hand. End quote. What happens, though, when the propagation of such symbols is not only via word of mouth or artistry, but when such symbols are literalized? Triss, the Azathanai, come new to this world from the Vitcher, seeks to answer this question. When Triss is led to Kharkanas, she makes a number of changes to the very nature of society by introducing a racial element where all that divided before was really class and religion. Triss gives some the deep black skin of darkness and others the shining white skin of light. Though before this thread grows too out of hand, let it be known that Erikson is not interested in doing in analyzing race here as much as, if anything, Erikson's analysis of race and representation for how unjustly certain races are treated is more present in the horrendous treatment of the dog runners and the deniers. The difference in skin color that Triss bestows upon individuals in Kharkanas is not so much based in cultural and ethnic difference, but more based in moral and ethic difference. It should be said as well that Triss is not some arbiter of truth and deserved judgment, so her gifts in the form of judgments are not necessarily appropriate or accurate in every sense. She is as much a fallible character as all others in this world. So for example of one of her gifts, one such symbolic gift of literalized opprobrium, in some cases opprobrium, when speaking with Rake, Triss remarks, night will claim your skin, before your eyes darkness will be revealed, but I will make visible the defiance within you as a gift. End quote. The specific gift to reflect his defiance is going to be his silver mane of hair, standing in contrast to his dark as night skin. And the defiance of which she speaks, this is forthcoming in Rake's dispute with Mother Dark. Rake is frustrated that Mother Dark will not identify an enemy and command him to fight for her. He shouts, "Then name your enemy," to which Mother Dark calmly replies, "I have none. Animander, win this peace for me, that is all I ask." Rake responds, "I am a warrior and I know only blood, Mother. I cannot win what I must first destroy." By which he means peace. Elsewhere in the Citadel, Centaura fumes at the symbolism in Triss's gift to her. Whereas Mother Dark was cursed with darkness and night, Centaura was cursed with glowing white skin, and now she seeks Hunral, for she sees in him some potential avenues for her to achieve her ambitions. Furthermore, her ambitions have been stoked, and she is eager to move forth by the aforementioned opprobrious gifts of Triss. Entering his chambers, she cries out, "I am cast out, you fool, banished from night. This was not Mother Dark's doing. The Azathan I said she could see into my soul. She said terrible things. And she reached out to me. There was light, blinding light." To which Ralph smartly replies, "High Priestess, I will tell you what I see when I now look upon you. I see a woman reborn. Centaura, you among all women do not belong in darkness." Hearing his argument, she agrees. "The light is within me, I feel it." To which he again carefully replies, "And I see it shining through, High Priestess. There is nothing to fear. The truth of that is plain to my eyes." And so an alliance is born between the cast-out High Priestess and the violent right hand of the ideologue Urusander. Centaura and Ral concoct a plan for her to travel to Urusander and share her gift with him and the rest of his legion. Part 3. Other characters analyzing and understanding Urusander. As Centaura heads to Urusander, as deniers and nobles are being ruthlessly slaughtered, and as Triss has just made of her judgments of Kharkanas' civilization these devastatingly divisive gifts, all the while the kingdom is rife with curiosity as to Urusander's thoughts on all that has transpired. I have not mentioned yet how Ral is the primary character responsible for instigating and commanding the violence against nobles and deniers actually being committed. Even though technically that violence is being committed in Urusander's name, this of course causes a conflict between Urusander and Ral, and Legion soldiers and Kharkanas citizens sense this divide, and they either pity or hate Urusander's inability to control the violent Ral. With orders to get Legion soldiers to stand down in their violence and murders, one of Ral's corporals, Corporal Renth, is sent away from Kharkanas. As he rides to deliver these instructions, he contemplates the differences between Ral and Urusander. Quote, Hun Ral had argued that now, more than ever, was the time for Lord Urusander's ascension. Once he stood at Mother Dark's side, the unruly elements would be hammered into submission, and whatever schism now threatened the faith could be addressed. It had seemed a contrary position, since he was in the process of dispatching riders out to all the units with orders to desist. Drunks had a way of spitting in two directions at once. The truth was, there was chaos in Corald Galen, and the sudden unleashing of bloodshed might shatter this entire realm, and Mother Dark with it. For all that, what had seemed relatively straightforward in Renth's eyes was now murky and confused, and a belligerent, red-eyed commander was hardly an inspiring send-off. Loyalty to Urusander alone kept Renth's hands on the reins, and his butt in the saddle. End quote. So no matter how confused, chaotic, deceptive, or destructive the literal commands and the situation on the ground, loyalty to the great hero, the figurehead Urusander, kept this Corporal Renth in line, following the orders of a lesser commander for whom he held no trust. This passage helps to demonstrate the reasons chaos has been instigated in Urusander's name, yet without Urusander's direct command. This pattern persists all throughout the novel. Next, we'll turn to a scene that heavily foreshadows and sets the stage for a more significant one later. In this moment, Serap, one of Ral's loyal lieutenants, converses with Urusander to explain the nature of the current religious and political situation, and why perhaps Urusander might now be forced into only one course of action. Serap announces, "Sir, there is need once again for the Legion. There is need for you." Orosander counters, Hunral would have the realm stirred in panic. He sows fear with the sole aim of resurrecting the Legion, not to meet this imagined threat, but to coerce the Highborn, Draconis, and ultimately Mother Dark. And then Orosander, in perhaps his moment of greatest clarity, admits, quote, "Old soldiers cannot fit in a peaceful world. They feel like ghosts and they hunger for the zeal of life. But the only life they know is one of violence. War is a drug to them, one they cannot do without. And for many others, to see an old soldier is to know of sacrifices they never made and to feel an obligation they come to resent. And so they would rather not see that old soldier. They would rather forget. For yet others, Serap, an old soldier reminds them of their own losses, and the fire stings anew. It is right that we go away, but more than that, it is right that we embrace silence and solitude." End quote. In this moment of clarity, Orosander is ready to give up on any justification for his impending civil war, yet Serap turns him back. Quote, "Sir, there are rumors, deniers among the Husk Legion, deniers among the Wardens of the Outer Reach, deniers among the Border Swords, even among the Highborn, all who refuse the cult of Mother Dark. We face a religious war, sir, and we are compromised on all sides." She continues further down, "Corald Galain needs you, sir. Corald Galain needs the Legion." And through this conversation, Orosander is eventually convinced of two things. First, that there is no logical or just cause for beginning a civil war and mobilizing his legion. But second, that the forces of the kingdom have been manipulated in such a way that the legion basically has no choice but to rise and join the fray, and the legion has no better commander than himself. Elsewhere in the kingdom, a noble and ally of the Purake household, Hishtollah, contemplates the place of the soldier and the veteran in the world, echoing much of what Orosander was confessing to Serap. Hishtollah says, "She thought of the Highborn as the counterweight to Orosander's legion, but we present a sordid example, all things considered. Squabbling among ourselves, scrabbling for the highest elevation above our neighbors, and spitting venom upon the one who stands at Mother Dark's side, as if questions of justice and propriety did not curdle on our own tongues. No, this was a wretched mess, and in many respects the Highborn had only themselves to blame. If a soldier risked her or his life, then it should be in defense of worthy things, family, promise, comfort, and freedom from strife. But if a trench were cut across such virtues, where so many were left to scramble for the paltry leavings of those who most profited by that soldier's sacrifice, then it was no wonder that scarred hands should itch." End quote. In this way of thinking, Hishtollah has come to understand, at least in a small way, what genuine and justified grievances the soldiers of Orosander's legion might have with the nobility and those more closely tied to Mother Dark. Finally, we will study one more passage to help convey where the rest of the kingdom stands on the important moral questions Orosander must be grappling with at this moment. Sharinus was introduced in the principal characters part of the essay, and really if there were any character to represent this section, this part 3 of the essay right here, it would be her. That being said, the passage we will study here is her in conversation with one Kagamandra Tullus, a character who represents the soldiers both Orosander and Hishtollah were pontificating on above, though now, through heroic feats, he has been raised to a higher status, Kagamandra has, much like Orosander himself. So what better pair to conclude a section devoted to the characters themselves analyzing Orosander's motivations and justifications. Kagamandra asks, "Winter draws ever closer. Sharinus, will we see Ticed corpses frozen to the ground in the months to come? I am sickened by the thought." To which she answers, hopefully, "With luck, this absurd war will be over by then. Do we not still bow to the will of Mother Dark? Lord Orosander will march soon, and you can be sure that he will see justice set upon the murderers who act in his name. By blade's edge he will end the madness. There are a number of interesting points to unpack here in Sharinus' statement. First and foremost, she is still unfailingly loyal and trusting of Urusander's virtue and ability to correct any wrongs. But second, her comment harkens back to the disagreement between Rake and Mother Dark. Sharinus has just said, by Blade's edge, he will end the madness, and in so doing, she has tried to justify violence with the promise of peace. She will go on to say that she has decided on standing with Urusander, if not his manipulative followers, and she begs Kagamandra to decide on his place as well. And now the stage is set as these two characters come to Neritsor, seat of Urusander, to see what has come of his meetings with the banished High Priestess, Centaura. Part 4. Centaura and Urusander and the birth of the leosin. Quote, I shall paint the face of darkness and give it a dead child's eyes, because in darkness we see nothing. In darkness, behold, there is peace. End quote. This quote is a poetic articulation of the beginning of Kadaspala, the painter's descent into madness, as he's raging against the horrors of the world. His frame of mind will soon find its thematic opposition in the form of Urusander's Legion. In the span of one chapter near the end of the book, Centaura basically conquers Urusander's Legion under her banner of purity, light, and self-righteousness, laying to rest much of the crippling and immobilizing doubt that has plagued the Legion for the majority of the novel. Centaura views herself as a powerful arbiter of opposition to everything she has just fled from in Kharkanas. Mother Dark, the nobility, High Priestess Emerald, Lanier. She thinks of herself, quote, I am indeed a threat to Mother Dark and to all who would kneel before her. Weakness and fear had driven her from Kharkanas, and in the time since she had, on occasion, amused herself imagining a triumphant return, with light scouring the city like a purging fire, end quote. It is with this mindset that she approaches Urusander. Mere pages later, she begs of him, Lord, alone you have nothing to withstand her, and yet you must, but not as her enemy. Rather present yourself as her one hope for peace. With my help, Lord, you can save Khorald Galain. And the her to which she refers there is, of course, Mother Dark. Centaura begs for a militaristic unit to save Khorald Galain from itself, but of the potentially violent means to that end, she has nothing to say yet. This manipulative language is how she is able to manipulate the reluctant commander, yet Urusander retains a bit of that reluctant attitude, at least near the beginning of their discussions. He counters, quote, and if I told you, High Priestess, that true justice stands in opposition to all that you have described, if you see as clearly as this, then I suggest we elevate this discussion. I well grasp your warning. If the Highborn stand prepared for war, it is no vast stretch to see them turning upon me and the Legion. This is absurd, end quote. He acknowledges the violence that might be necessary to achieve the peace Centaura speaks of, as he also acknowledges how absurd the justification for any such violence or civil war actually is. Though even this purely logical awareness and reason here still all fails eventually to prevent the overwhelming power of Centaura's cause, with all of its symbolism and its ironic promise of injustice. Let us return once again to the real heart of Centaura's argument and all of these exchanges with Urusander. Centaura reflects on these conversations. Quote, dark and light, as the right hand opposes the left. Urusander, I begin to see a way to draw those hands together, to clasp in union and so find strength and balance. And no, we need not speak of love, only necessity, something I think you understand. We shall make you Father Light when whether you welcome the title or not, end quote. And now, welcome or not, the symbolism and judgment Triss hoisted onto Centaura, Centaura will now in turn brand Urusander and his legion with. Whereas Urusander's logic and reason might effectively deny her arguments, could that same logic and reason stand up to a divine call to justice? These questions, raised by Centaura's intent, echo all the way back to Kadaspala contemplating the just religious cause, a quote used to kick off and introduce Erikson's theme at the beginning of this essay. That is to say nothing of one of Kataspala's earlier soliloquies, wherein the painter considers one of his hands the god of creation and the other the god of destruction. Kataspala, however, deserves an entire essay dedicated to his moral journey, so there's no need to say more on that reference here, other than to remind readers how deftly crafted and layered Erikson has made his themes in this book. Centaura continues in her introspection to succinctly summarize her aims. Quote, "Still, the promise of light remained locked within her. Did she need sacred ground? A temple of her own, blessed in the name of what? Light? In answer to Mother Dark? Leosin. Who can deny the cleansing powers of revelation when the very word points to something revealed, to the hidden exposed, and if we make of her mystery a host of banal truths, then Urisander can stand before her and be seen as her equal. Cut me free, Mother Dark, and see how I take you down a notch or two, for the good of us all, of course. The good of Curald Galain." No other quote better encapsulates the way in which Centaura's ambition for herself is wrapped up in her moralizing and her efforts to symbolically brand Urisander's legion with a just and worthy cause. And finally, readers will arrive at the moment in which the Leosin people and the Leosin cause are simultaneously born. In her desperate plea to force others to share her symbolic banishment, and amidst a heated debate with Shirinus, with others present, most importantly with Urisander present, Centaura finally argues, quote, "A crowded soul, Captain, is a place of shadows and gloom. Scour it clean, and nothing will remain to block the light. Hear me, I tell you, I am so afflicted. I am burned away inside. All that remains of the woman I once was is this shell you see before you, and see how even it is transformed by the light burning in my soul." And then to Urisander she says, "Lord, do what needs to be done to return Curald Galain to peace. I will await you, and as proof of my power, I will yield now this gift." And so light blazes forth from her, and she has successfully usurped whatever causes or righteous reasons the Legion had to fight for previously, and placed her gift, herself, in the way of light on that lofty throne, the throne of the worthy cause. Shirinus's reaction can be read as both the view of Blind Galan, the narrator, but also as that of Stephen Erikson, the author. Shirinus, closing out this storyline in Forge of Darkness, considers that, quote, "In this light, even justice will burn," end quote. Whereas light is often portrayed as a benevolent force of good and joy in other narratives, Erikson has made of light an unworthy cause, but only really one unworthy cause heaped upon a mound of self-righteous justifications, several other self-righteous justifications, all of which are highlighted throughout Forge of Darkness, and many of which I have touched on throughout this essay. Conclusion and Hood's worthy cause. By the end of the novel, what questions have been answered? Has Erikson taught his readers any lessons on justice and moralizing? Typically, Erikson is careful not to be too prescriptive in his exploration of theme. He will offer several characters' perspectives on certain themes, and perhaps by choosing which themes to look more closely at, he is in a way asking his audience to consider these issues rather than others, though he will still never preach one virtuous cause as better than any other. Between Rake and Mother Dark, there is indecision, frustration, and an urge for violence balanced by an urge to retreat and remain silent. Between Centaura and Urisander, there is the selfish ambition of a cast-out priestess balanced by a commander's love for his soldiers. There is no heroic or villainous cause in this conflict. The only thing heroic, at the end of the day, is the effort to grapple with one's own place in the world and consider how often we might be behaving self-righteously, or how often we might be misappropriating justice and virtue as a cause to serve our own ambitions. Self-reflection and inward critical thinking are heroic, whereas the power dynamics and forces of the world may be villainous. On one final note, To unravel a bit the conclusion I have just drawn, Erickson might actually have listed one worthy cause in Forge of Darkness, and this cause only appears near the end when we are told the ambitions of a grieving Jaghut. I have left this story alone for the most part because the character at the center of it only appears near the end of the book, and he appears rather disconnected from the Kharkanas conflict. The Lord of Hate, a Jaghut named Gothos, has chained up his grieving brother, Hood, to prevent Hood from doing something foolish. Now, what is this foolish action he might take? Draconis explains to him, quote, "Hood, you cannot defeat death itself," to which Hood replies, "I shall call for companions. My enemy shall be the injustice of mortality. I am certain that I will gather a few to my cause, the grieving, the lost. We shall be a solemn handful, but none will doubt our resolve." End quote. And as readers, can we doubt the worthiness of this cause? Personally, I find it difficult to deny anyone the ability to rectify the injustice of death, particularly the injustice of an unexpected or violent death. So even though it is a widely fantastical and overly ambitious notion to wage a war against death itself, perhaps that is exactly how ridiculous and how ambitious one must be to conclude that any cause, or to find any cause in the end, that might be the only cause worth fighting for. Perhaps in this case, a war in the name of peace is not so hypocritical. Thank you. All right, I need to take a breath. That was a lot, huh? Thank you to those of you who have made it to this point. I have put more effort into this video than any of the others I've put out so far. I will try to attach the Word document somewhere either in the description or comment section. If you would like to see more in-depth analysis videos like this one, please like and subscribe, share the video and tell your friends, especially the nerdy ones like me who might really be into this sort of video. Again, my goals are not so lofty as to have such a niche series' analytical review do much to explode my channel growth. However, I do sincerely dream of someday when I can have these sorts of in-depth analytical conversations with other content creators on the platform. Thanks again so much for watching. I'm always open to feedback, any disagreements, or any advice on my channel. And as always, if you have anything to share, please comment below. Thank you so much.